A laser cannon.
We're not sure how to describe a weapon of this scale.
It's another Death Star.
I wish that were the case, Major. This was the Death Star. And this is Starkiller Base.
Okay, so hear me out. This might be the most important scene in Star Wars The Force Awakens. Yup, you heard me, the most important scene in the whole movie. Let's watch it again.
It's another Death Star.
I wish that were the case, Major. This was the Death Star. And this is Starkiller Base.
So it's big.
The thing is, Han Solo is right. Starkiller Base, which for the three of you who've never seen it, is the planet-destroying MacGuffin at the center of this film's climax, is literally the Death Star, but bigger. What's important about this scene is not that The Force Awakens is stealing its big third act set piece from probably the most iconic third act set piece of all time, but that it's going out of its way to tell you what it's doing. This kind of scene has been popping up a lot in movies as of late, from Jurassic World.
Yeah, no, it did. I understand people died. It was terrible, but that first park was legit.
To Mary Poppins Returns.
The whole time I've been looking after them, they've been looking after me. I had it all backward.
A Banks family trait.
These are sort of meta-textual get-out-of-jail-free cards. By entering into a dialogue with the audience and letting them in on the joke, these films can steal everything from music cues to entire plot lines from other movies and get off scot-free. Jurassic World is not Jurassic Park, but it is Jurassic Park. Michael Banks is not his father, but he is his father. Starkiller Base is not the Death Star, but it is the Death Star. The thing is, these aren't jokes. These films aren't spoofs of the movies they're stealing from, they're sequels. But what kind of sequel is just a remake of the movie it's a sequel to? What would that make it? What would we call it? Requel. Noun. A sequel to a popular film that draws heavily on the plot and iconography of said film so as to act as both a continuation and a reimagining of the story. Oh my god, how do people see in these things? Prequels are notable both for their immense popularity over the last several years and their ability to occur seemingly across any genre. Believe it or not, Mary Poppins Returns and Halloween 2018 have a lot more in common than you'd like to think.
Really? How incredibly rude.
Usually considered ground zero for requels is 2015's Jurassic World, itself technically a sequel to Joe Johnston's oft-forgot Jurassic Park 3, but really more of a direct continuation of Steven Spielberg's iconic original. Jurassic World established many of the criteria subsequent requels would follow. First, the film is careful to choose which parts of its lineage to pull from. Like I said, Jurassic World bears far more resemblance to OG Jurassic Park than either of the other two sequels in regards to style, character, and plot. Both Jurassic World and Jurassic Park are set at a dinosaur theme park with plots that revolve around the dinosaurs escaping and wreaking havoc. Both World and Park have lead characters whose emotional journeys center around protecting two kids and embracing their parental instincts, and both World and Park balance out their eerie monster movie aesthetics with moments of awe, wonder, and humor. The only thing Jurassic World shares with either of the other two Jurassic Park movies are the dinosaurs?
Alan!
Why? Because, well, the rest of the Jurassic Park movies aren't nearly as popular. Relative to the success of the first film, The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 drew diminishing returns from both audiences and critics, with each consecutive film grossing nearly half what the previous one did. The only way for a sequel like Jurassic World to succeed was to take the series back to its roots, and, by essentially ignoring their existence, act as an apology for every Jurassic Park sequel since the original. It isn't just an adaptation of a film, it's an adaptation of the culture around that film.
That first park was legit.
Regardless of what you think of Jurassic World, this became an immensely popular model for sequels over the last several years. Take Force Awakens, which, as I mentioned, looks really similar to A New Hope and bends over backwards so as to not look like or even talk about the much-maligned prequel trilogy of the early 2000s, or Creed, which lifts the gritty underdog boxing narrative from the first couple beloved Rocky movies while axing the more implausible elements from less popular installments.
Whatever he hits, he destroys.
Hell, last year's Halloween went so far as to say that every crappy Halloween sequel since the original never even happened.
Wasn't it her brother who, like, cold-blooded mutilated all those teenagers?
No.
that's just a bit that some people made up to make them feel better, I think.
Once again, even though these films are doing the work of a remake, i.e. updating a particular story for a different audience, they're not technically remakes, not in the way something like the Lethal Weapon TV show or the Planet of the Apes movies are. What sets requels apart aren't just the kinds of things they'll pull from the movies they're requeling, but the kinds of movies that get requels in the first place. Let's go back to Jurassic World. Directed by Steven Spielberg and featuring cutting-edge special effects from the Stan Winston studio, Jurassic Park wasn't just a massive success upon its release, it continues to be a massive success to this day. For example, no matter what science tells us a T-Rex actually looked like, this is still everybody's go-to reference point for what a T-Rex should look like. Lethal Weapon, on the other hand, might have been a huge hit and spawned an entire franchise in the 90s, but let's face it, how many of you have actually seen all the Lethal Weapon movies? Moreover, how many of you actually love Lethal Weapon? Like, love it. Now, I'm not docking Lethal Weapon, but it goes to show how ripe that movie was for a remake. Something everyone's tangentially aware of enough to be interested in, but not involved with enough to care what it becomes. Requels, on the other hand, are overwhelmingly sequels to watershed cultural moments which easily cross generational borders. No one in their right mind would remake Jurassic Park because this is what a T-Rex looks like, damn it! However, if your film is a canon sequel, you can get away with remaking pretty much anything. Even that exact same image.
That first park was legit.
It's the same reason Hellboy is getting a remake, but Ghostbusters is getting a requel. Hellboy just doesn't share the same space on the cultural pedestal as Ghostbusters. Everyone's heard of Hellboy, but everyone has seen Ghostbusters, and that's an important distinction. There are exceptions to this. Both the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and Disney's Beauty and the Beast should by all means count as watershed cultural moments, and yet both have been remade to massive box office success. But these remakes are also crossing mediums in interesting ways. Spider-Man is a comic book character, and comic book characters get rebooted, remade, and retooled so often both on screen and on the page that it's easy to have two separate franchises running congruently with the same character without anyone batting an eye. And 2017's Beauty and the Beast had the novelty of being a live-action version of an animated movie, which looks increasingly like it's going to work in Lion King's favor as well. Mary Poppins, on the other hand, was live-action to begin with, and I bet you $1 million Disney wouldn't be enjoying the same critical and award season praise had the movie been a remake as opposed to a requel. But requels have just as much to do with the movies that get them as they do with the people who make them. Generally speaking, movies get requels from directors who were at one point their target audience. Colin Trevorrow, director of Jurassic World, would have been 17 when Jurassic Park came out. J.J. Abrams, director of The Force Awakens, would have been 11 when the first Star Wars came out. And Rob Marshall, director of Mary Poppins Returns, would have been 4 when Mary Poppins came out. This means that all 3 of those movies got sequels that were made by the kids they were marketed towards. Kids who grew up with those movies, kids who became adults and showed those movies to their kids, and so on and so forth. So it's not surprising that Jurassic World, Force Awakens, Mary Poppins Returns, and pretty much every requel ever are all about the same thing. Themselves. Every one of these movies needs to justify its own existence, to ask why we need Mary Poppins, why we need Luke Skywalker, why we need Laurie Strode, or dinosaurs, or Rocky Balboa, because they're made by people who needed those things in the first place. Art exists mostly in the minds of those who consume it. Star Wars means something different to a guy who saw it back in 1977 than it does to the guy who created it. That's why George Lucas's prequels were so ill-received by fans like J.J. Abrams. Well, part of the reason. And why fans like J.J. Abrams go on to make movies like The Force Awakens. It's a critique of everything they didn't resonate with and a celebration of everything they did. It's an adaptation of the original piece and an adaptation of the culture around it. It's not the Death Star, but it is the Death Star. And that's the point. But not in Mad Max. On the surface, 2015's Mad Max Fury Road looks like the perfect requel. It's a new chapter in a long dormant yet hugely influential franchise that's careful to evoke the tone, aesthetics, and narrative beats from more popular installments, namely Mad Max The Road Warrior, while going out of its way to distance itself from the cozy PG-13 thrills of the decidedly less popular Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. If you think about it, Fury Road fulfills 2 of the 3 criteria for requels, except instead of getting the seal of approval from the guys who created it, they just got the guy who created it to come back, and it turns out that made a world of difference. Fury Road might look like a requel, but it plays like something you've never seen before, Mad Max or otherwise. Part of this might be due to the nature of this specific series. Anyone familiar with these movies knows logic and continuity aren't exactly the name of the game here. Every Mad Max film exists in its own little universe, connected only loosely by small details like the kind of car he drives, so that this requel is so uninterested with being about being a Mad Max movie stems from there not being a set template for how a Mad Max movie is supposed to work. Which isn't to say a movie like Fury Road couldn't have easily been your average requel had it been made by a fan, say somebody who grew up watching The Road Warrior. Max looms so large over the post-apocalyptic genre that a 21st century update could have easily been a meta commentary on his place as a post-apocalyptic trendsetter and everything that genre has become since he more or less invented it. Instead, Fury Road is barely about Mad Max at all. He's a passenger in his own story, which might have pissed off all the internet edgelords, but made for a powerful, thrilling, and for some even meaningful film which didn't reinvent the franchise so much as create an entirely new experience, complete with new characters, new sounds, and new motifs. It's that sense of newness that I firmly believe can be traced back to the film's director. George Miller might be pushing 74, but he's always been more interested in pushing the envelope than any of the other directors I've mentioned. His films aren't just new, novel experiences, they're about newness. They're about change and evolution and moving forward. Might I remind you, this is the same guy who said he'd rather get shot in the head than make another Happy Feet sequel. It should come as no shock then that the sequel he does end up making is not even a sequel at all. It's something new. Now look, I'm not saying requels are bad, they're not a problem that needs fixing, they're simply a thing that exists, and I find that fascinating. I've liked pretty much every movie I've mentioned, but being critical of the movies we like also helps us gain a better understanding of what makes them work. I don't like The Force Awakens any less, I just think people are going to remember it for the things it didn't borrow from A New Hope. Like, important as this scene may be, no one is going to remember it 25 years from now. They're going to remember this. And this. And this.